I never thought my generosity would become a weapon against me. When I agreed to pay my sister Eliza's medical school tuition, I believed in family loyalty and promises kept. "We'll be partners in this," she had sworn, eyes shining with tears of gratitude. 2 years and $87,000 later, I discovered the truth at my father's will reading. While Eliza inherited the family's $1 million estate, I received only his watch and some books. "As Rebecca has already received her share," the attorney read aloud, his eyes avoiding mine. My sacrifice had been rewritten as my inheritance. My sister's manipulation had been rewarded. My place in the family had been calculated to the dollar and dismissed. They all expected me to accept this betrayal with the same quiet responsibility I'd shown my entire life. They were about to learn their mistake. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today and if you're enjoying these stories. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. I never thought a single family meeting would change the course of my entire life. It was a crisp October evening when I got the call from my mom, Catherine. Her voice sounded tight, controlled in that way it gets when she's trying not to show panic. "Rebecca, honey, we need you to come home this weekend. Your father and I need to discuss something important with you and your sister." That was all she would say. But the urgency in her voice had me canceling my weekend plans with Mark and driving the 40 minutes from downtown Chicago to my parents' suburban home by Friday evening. The house I grew up in had always felt like a safe harbor, a spacious 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping and a warmth that enveloped you the moment you stepped through the front door. But that evening, the tension in the living room was palpable. My father, William, sat rigidly in his leather armchair, silver hair neatly combed, but deep worry lines creasing his forehead. Mom perched nervously on the armrest beside him. And Eliza, my younger sister by 3 years, sat cross-legged on the floor, looking up at them with confusion that mirrored my own. At 27, I had built a good life for myself. I had a stable job as a software developer, a downtown apartment, and was saving for a house. Eliza, at 24, was halfway through medical school, brilliant and determined as always. Dad cleared his throat. "Girls, we've called you here because we're facing a difficult situation." He folded his hands, his knuckles turning white. "My investment company has suffered some major losses, very major losses." Mom reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, already calculating potential scenarios in my head. The practical one, as always. Dad's eyes shifted to Eliza. "It means we can no longer afford to pay for Eliza's medical school. We're so sorry, sweetheart." Eliza's face crumpled. "But I only have 2 years left," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Everything I've worked for." "We've looked at every option," Mom said, her voice breaking. "Loans, second mortgages, there's just no way." I watched my sister, the golden child, the future doctor, the one whose science fair projects and piano recitals had always drawn relatives from 3 states away, as her dreams seemed to collapse in front of her. "How much are we talking about?" I heard myself ask. Dad named a figure that made my stomach drop. It would clean out my house fund completely, plus require additional saving over the next 2 years. Everything I'd worked for since graduation. "Rebecca, we're not asking you to help," Dad said quickly, reading my thoughts. "This is our problem to solve." "I need some air," Eliza said suddenly, rushing out to the backyard. After a few minutes, I followed her. She sat on the old wooden swing set that Dad had refused to dismantle even though we'd outgrown it years ago. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Hey," I said softly, taking the swing beside her. "Everything I've worked for, Becca. Down the drain." I pushed myself gently with my foot, the familiar creak of the swing set taking me back to simpler times. "Maybe not." She looked up, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the patio lights. "What do you mean?" That night, I barely slept. I called Mark from my childhood bedroom, explaining the situation while pacing back and forth on the faded blue carpet. "Becca, that's your entire house fund," Mark said, concern evident in his voice. "The one we've been talking about using together someday." "I know." "And what happens when you need that money? When does she pay you back?" Valid questions that made my stomach knot with anxiety. "I don't know yet. We haven't worked out the details. Just promise me you'll think this through before you commit to anything," Mark said. "I know they're your family, but you deserve to put yourself first sometimes." The next morning, Eliza and I sat at the kitchen table with steaming mugs of coffee between us. Our parents had gone out to give us space, though I suspected they were hoping I'd step in to solve their problem. "If I help you," I said carefully, "we need a real agreement, with repayment terms." Eliza nodded eagerly. "Of course, anything." "Once you're a doctor, you'll help me buy the house I've been saving for. We'll be partners in this," she said, her eyes shining with renewed hope. "I swear, Becca, I'll never forget what you're doing for me." Against Mark's advice, I decided to formalize our arrangement. I drafted a simple contract outlining the payment schedule and repayment terms once Eliza began her medical career. When I presented it to her, she didn't hesitate to sign. "This feels so official," she laughed, scribbling her signature. Dad wandered into the dining room just as we finished. He picked up the contract, reading it through his reading glasses. A small smile formed on his lips. "Smart," he said, nodding at me. "Always the responsible one." He signed as a witness at the bottom. "You know," he added, patting my shoulder, "family always takes care of family." I felt a mixture of pride and unease as I made the first transfer, $30,000, gone from my account in an instant. That evening, Mom insisted on hosting a celebration dinner. She prepared all my favorites, and as we raised our glasses, Dad offered a toast. "To Rebecca," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your generosity will not be forgotten." Later, as I helped clear the dishes, Dad pulled me aside in the kitchen. "This kind of loyalty won't go unrewarded in my estate planning," he said quietly. "I want you to know that." I brushed it off then. Estate planning seemed so distant, and I wasn't helping Eliza for future gain. The sacrifices piled up quickly after that. A month later, my boss called me into her office. "The Seattle position is yours if you want it," she said. 20% salary increase, management track, but you'd need to relocate next month. I thought about the remaining payments I'd promised Eliza, about being 3 time zones away from my family during this fragile time. "I'm sorry," I said. "I can't leave Chicago right now." Julie's disappointment was evident. "This train doesn't come around often, Rebecca. Turning this down will stall your trajectory here. I understand." With my finances stretched thin, my nice downtown apartment became a luxury I could no longer afford. Mark helped me move to a smaller place in a neighborhood that made him uncomfortable. "This is just temporary," I assured him as we carried boxes up the narrow stairwell. "Once Eliza starts paying me back, I'll find somewhere better." Mark didn't respond, just nodded and grabbed another box. By Christmas, the strain was showing in unexpected ways. We gathered at my parents' house, the tree glittering with the same ornaments we'd had since childhood. The presents underneath told their own story. Eliza received a new iPad, designer boots, and noise-canceling headphones for studying. I received a scarf, a book, and a framed family photo. "We're a bit tight this year," Mom explained apologetically when she saw my expression. "But we wanted to make sure Eliza has everything she needs for school." That night, as we sat around the fire, I mentioned some issues with my new apartment: a leaky faucet, unreliable heat. "Oh, that reminds me," Mom interrupted, turning to Eliza. "Tell everyone about that fascinating neurology rotation you just finished." The subject change was so abrupt, it left me speechless. Mark and I fought on the drive home. "They don't even See what you're doing for them, he said, knuckles white on the steering wheel. They're still giving her everything while you're living in that awful apartment. She's in medical school. It's stressful. And you're working 60-hour weeks to support her. When was the last time your parents asked how you're doing? I had no answer for that. The overtime became necessary as the payments continued. Date nights with Mark became rare, then non-existent. When we did see each other, conversation inevitably circled back to my family situation. I just think you're being taken advantage of, he said, during what was supposed to be a nice dinner out, our first in months. You don't understand family. Obligation, I snapped back. His face hardened. No, I understand it perfectly. I just think it should go both ways. The final payment came due just before Eliza's graduation, a total of $87,000 transferred from my account to hers over 2 years. My savings completely depleted, but I felt a sense of accomplishment watching her cross that stage, among the top of her class. At the graduation party, I stood by the drinks table, taking a moment alone. Dad's voice carried from the next room where he spoke to my aunt and uncle, Eliza. Did it all on her own? He was saying proudly. Working through incredible hardship. That's the kind of determination she has. I froze, glass halfway to my lips. Did it all on her own? The statement hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my sacrifice gone unacknowledged, it had been erased from the narrative entirely. Eliza's medical school graduation was held in the university's grand auditorium. I arrived early, hoping to get a good seat, only to discover that special family section seats had been reserved up front, where my parents sat, beaming. I found a spot halfway back, among distant relatives and friends. When Eliza took the stage for her speech as one of the top graduates, she looked radiant in her cap and gown. Her voice carried clearly through the hall. I wouldn't be here without the incredible support of my parents, she said, her eyes glistening. Mom, Dad, you sacrificed everything to help me achieve this dream. You never wavered, even when finances got tight. I waited for her to continue, to acknowledge my contribution. She didn't. The reception afterward was a flurry of congratulations and photographs. When I finally made my way to Eliza, she hugged me tightly. Can you believe it? Dr. Eliza Reed, she squealed. I'm so proud of you, I said, meaning it despite the sting of her omission. We did it. Her smile faltered slightly before returning. Yes, we all did, she said, before being whisked away by a group of her classmates. 3 weeks later, Eliza called with exciting news. She'd secured a prestigious residency position in Boston. That's amazing, I said. When do you start? Next month. It's all happening so fast, she gushed. Listen, I hate to ask, but could you help with the moving expenses? Just a loan until I get my first paycheck. The request gave me pause. Eliza, what about our repayment plan? You're supposed to start paying me back now that you've graduated. A beat of silence followed. Oh, that, she said, her tone cooling. Becca, that was just a formality. You know I can't start repaying right away. I'm still basically a student during residency. The agreement says, I'll get to it when I'm established, she interrupted. Maybe in a few years. You're being a bit intense about this. That evening, Mark came over with takeout and wine. We'd been working on our relationship, trying to reconnect after the stressful years of supporting Eliza. As we sat on my tiny balcony, he suddenly took my hand. Rebecca, I've been thinking a lot about us, he began. I love you, and I want a future together. My heart swelled. I want that too. But, he continued, his expression growing serious, we need to establish some boundaries with your family. I can't watch you sacrifice everything for them anymore. The warmth I'd felt moments before began to fade. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to marry you, but not if it means signing up for a lifetime of being second place to your sister's needs. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I wanted to reassure him, to promise things would be different, but the words wouldn't. Come! How could I guarantee something I wasn't sure I could control? Mark left that night with his grandmother's ring still in his pocket, and our relationship in limbo. 2 weeks later, I received an official letter from the IRS. They were auditing my tax returns, specifically the large transfers to Eliza, which they classified as gifts rather than loans. According to the letter, I potentially owed significant taxes plus penalties. Panicked, I called Eliza. The IRS is saying I owe gift taxes on the money I sent you, I explained. I need you to help with the penalties at least. It's several $1,000s. Oh no, she said, sounding distracted. That's awful. But Becca, I'm drowning in student debt right now. There's no way I can help. Student debt? Your tuition was covered. That was the whole point of our arrangement. There are other expenses, she said vaguely. Books, equipment, living costs. You have no idea how expensive medical school is. Before I could press further, she claimed she had to rush to an orientation meeting and hung up. 2 days later, I was scrolling through social media when I saw something that made my stomach drop. My mother had posted photos of a family vacation in Europe. My parents and Eliza posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, shopping bags from designer stores visible in the background. I hadn't even known they were planning a trip. I called my mother. Immediately. You're in Paris? With Eliza? Oh, yes, Mom said cheerfully. Your father thought we all needed a celebration trip after Eliza's graduation. We would have invited you, but we know how busy you are with work. Mom, Eliza just told me she can't help with my tax issue because she's drowning in student debt. Yet she's shopping in Paris? A pause. Rebecca, don't be petty. This is a special time for your sister. 2 months later, Dad had a minor heart attack. The call came at 2 a.m., and I rushed to the hospital, terrified. He was stabilized quickly, but the doctor warned that his stress levels needed to decrease dramatically. During his recovery at home, I stopped by daily to help Mom. One afternoon, I approached his study with a cup of tea, pausing when I heard hushed voices inside. William, are you sure about these changes? My mother was asking. After everything that's happened? Yes, my father replied. The new will reflects what's best for both girls, given their situations. I pushed the door open, and they both startled. Changes to what? I asked. Just some boring paperwork, Dad said, shuffling the documents on his desk. How about that tea? The following week, I ran into Mrs. Thompson, a family friend, at the grocery store. Her awkward greeting told me something was off. I'm so sorry. About your difficulties, dear, she said, patting my arm. Difficulties? She looked uncomfortable. Well, Eliza mentioned you've been having some money troubles, spending problems. We're all hoping things turn around for you. Ice formed in my stomach. What exactly did Eliza say? Just that you'd been financially irresponsible and blew through your savings on, well, frivolous things. She lowered her voice. She's worried about you. The betrayal cut deep. While I'd been living in a cramped apartment, working overtime to fulfill my promise to her, Eliza had been spinning a narrative that I was reckless with money. A few days later, Dad invited me to lunch. Throughout the meal, he asked probing questions about my finances. Had I considered downsizing my apartment further? Was I contributing enough to my 401k? Perhaps I should track my spending more carefully. Dad, I'm careful with money. You know that. He nodded, but his expression remained concerned. It's just that Eliza mentioned you might be struggling with budgeting. She's worried about you. It became clear that Eliza's whisper campaign had reached my father, coloring his perception of me. The daughter who had sacrificed her savings was now viewed as financially irresponsible. I decided to visit Eliza in Boston, hoping that face-to-face conversation might clear the air. She seemed surprised when I called but agreed to host me for the weekend. Her struggling resident lifestyle was nothing like I'd imagined. She lived in a luxury high-rise apartment in an exclusive area of Boston, with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the harbor. A brand-new Mercedes was parked in her assigned spot. "Nice place," I said, taking in the designer furniture and state-of-the-art kitchen. "Residency must pay better than I thought." Eliza shrugged. "I have roommates most of the time. They're just out of town this weekend." But there were no signs of other occupants, no extra toiletries in the bathroom, no additional clothes in the closet I glimpsed when passing the second bedroom, which had been converted into a home office. That evening, after a few glasses of wine, I brought up the repayment agreement directly. "Eliza, I'm struggling. I gave you everything I had, and now I'm facing tax penalties. I need you to start honoring our agreement." Her friendly demeanor vanished instantly. "Why are you so obsessed with money? This is why you can't maintain relationships. Rebecca, you commodify everything, even family." "This isn't about commodifying anything. It's about honoring your word." "I'm building my career," she snapped. "Unlike you, I can't just stay in the same programming job forever. I have to network, look the part, live in the right neighborhood. These are investments in my future." "Investments made with my money," I reminded her. Her eyes narrowed. "You know what your problem is? You're jealous. You always have been, just because Mom and Dad recognize my potential." I left the next morning, the gulf between us wider than ever. Back in Chicago, I received a call from Sandra, my father's longtime secretary and an old family friend. Her voice was hushed, nervous. "Rebecca, I shouldn't be doing this, but I think you need to know. Your father recently updated his will." My heart sank. "And? Your portion has been significantly reduced. Eliza will inherit nearly everything. The house, the family business, his investments. It's over $1 million in total." "What do I get?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Some personal items. A small cash bequest. Nothing substantive." She paused. "Rebecca, I've worked with your father for 20 years. This doesn't seem like him. I think someone has been influencing his decisions." The revelation about my father's will left me reeling. After sleepless nights and hours of deliberation, I decided a family intervention was the only way forward. I gathered my documentation, bank statements showing the transfers, our signed agreement, tax documents reflecting the penalties I'd paid, and called my parents. "We need to talk, all of us, including Eliza." Dad sounded wary. "What's this about?" "Rebecca?" "It's about the truth. I'll be over Saturday at noon. Please make sure Eliza is there." That Saturday, I arrived to find them already positioned in the living room like a united front. Dad in his armchair, Mom and Eliza on the sofa. I took the seat across from them and placed my folder on the coffee table. "I know about the will," I began, "and I think we need to address the financial situation between Eliza and me." Dad's expression hardened. "Spying on my private affairs now?" "That's not the point, Dad. The point is that I emptied my savings to put Eliza through medical school, based on promises from both of you. She promised to pay me back. You hinted at including me fairly in your estate planning." Eliza leaned forward, her face a mask of concern. "Rebecca, if this is about money—" "It's not just about money," I interrupted, pushing the agreement across the table. "It's about honesty, about keeping your word." Mom picked up the document, frowning. "Families support each other without keeping score, Rebecca. This contract seems cold." It wasn't cold when Dad witnessed it, when he commended me for helping, when you all celebrated my generosity. I looked at each of them. But now that Eliza has what she wanted, suddenly I'm money-grubbing for expecting the same support in return. "Your sister is establishing her career," Dad said. "This is a critical time for her. And the last 2 years weren't critical for me." I passed on a promotion, moved to a cheaper apartment, lost my relationship, all to help her. Eliza's eyes welled with tears. I never asked you to make those choices. That's on you. The perfect tears, right on cue. I'd seen this performance before. After an hour of circular arguments, it became clear that this intervention was failing. They had constructed a narrative where Eliza was the vulnerable achiever who needed protection, and I was the bitter sister trying to impede her success. As Mom and Eliza went to the kitchen to prepare tea, a transparent attempt to diffuse the tension, Dad beckoned me to follow him to his study. "Rebecca," he said once the door closed behind us, "you've always been the strong one. Ever since you were little, you've been independent, capable. And that's being held against me now?" He sighed, looking suddenly older than his 68 years. "It's not about holding anything against you. It's about recognizing that Eliza needs the security more than you do. You'll land on your feet no matter what. You always do. So I'm being punished for being responsible? No one's punishing you," he insisted. "My estate planning reflects my assessment of what each of you needs going forward. Eliza is more vulnerable." Vulnerable? Dad, she's manipulating you. She lives in a luxury apartment, drives a brand new Mercedes. On loans, he interrupted. Medical school debt. I stared at him in disbelief. Her tuition was covered. By me, remember? He waved his hand dismissively. There are other expenses. You're successful, Rebecca. Your tech job, my tech job barely covers my rent since I emptied my savings for Eliza. I'm not some Silicon Valley millionaire, Dad. I'm a regular developer at a medium-sized company, living paycheck to paycheck now because I trusted my family. But I could see in his eyes that the narrative was fixed. In his mind, I was far more successful than I actually was, and Eliza was struggling despite all evidence to the contrary. The next day, I met my mother for coffee, hoping to appeal to her directly. The cafe was busy, providing some privacy in the white noise of conversations and espresso machines. "Mom, I need to understand your side in all this," I began, keeping my voice level. "You've watched everything unfold. You know what I sacrificed for Eliza." She stirred her latte slowly. "I've always tried to stay neutral between you girls." Neutral? Mom, there's nothing neutral about encouraging Dad to leave everything to Eliza. Her head snapped up. "Who told you that? Does it matter?" "I know it's happening." She had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Your sister has always needed more support, Rebecca. You're too independent for your own good sometimes. We worry about Eliza. We don't worry about you. Maybe you should start." That evening, I received an email that had been misdirected to my old family email address, one I rarely checked anymore. It was a conversation between my mother and father from 6 months ago, when Dad had first started considering changes to his will. "Rebecca will be fine no matter what," my mother had written. "She's always been too independent for her own good, and a smaller inheritance might actually teach her to rely on family more. Eliza needs our protection, especially with her student loans. Student loans that didn't exist, since I had covered her tuition." The deception ran deeper than I'd imagined. The next day, I contacted a friend who worked in investment banking and asked him to discreetly check into my father's company's financial status around the time they'd claimed hardship. What? He found confirmed my worst suspicions. There had been no major losses. The company had experienced a brief downturn, followed by a substantial recovery. The financial hardship that had prompted me to step in had been greatly exaggerated, if not fabricated entirely. They had manipulated me into depleting my savings, while preserving family wealth for Eliza's future inheritance. With growing unease, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer who specialized in family financial disputes. Her office was small but immaculate, with credentials displayed tastefully on the walls. "Based on what you've shared," she said after reviewing my documents, "the agreement with your sister is technically valid. However, pursuing it would be costly and time-consuming. She leaned forward. And it would almost certainly permanently damage your family relationships. Are you prepared for that possibility? I think those relationships are already damaged, I replied. Beyond repair? Possibly, she nodded sympathetically. As for challenging the will, that would be even more difficult. Your father is alive and appears to be of sound mind. Proving undue influence would be an uphill battle without substantial evidence. As news of the conflict spread through the family, lines were quickly drawn. Most relatives sided with my parents and Eliza, urging me to let it go for the sake of family harmony. Only my Aunt Martha, my father's sister, stood firmly in my corner. This isn't the first time this has happened in our family, she told me over lunch. Your grandmother favored your father over me in much the same way. History repeats itself. Martha's validation gave me strength, but the isolation from the rest of the family was taking its toll. Then came the breaking point. After a particularly heated phone call with my father about the inheritance situation, he suffered a major heart attack. I rushed to the hospital, sick with worry that our argument had triggered it. In the waiting room, Eliza confronted me. Her voice just quiet enough that other visitors couldn't hear, but loud enough to reach our extended family members nearby. Are you happy now? She hissed. Your greed did this. He was updating his financial documents again because you wouldn't stop pressuring him. My Aunt Rose gasped. A cousin looked away uncomfortably. The narrative was being written in real time. I was the villain who had endangered our father's life with my greed. While Dad recovered in intensive care, Mom asked me to help organize his home office, collecting important documents the doctors might need. As I sorted through papers, I discovered a leather-bound journal in his desk drawer. I knew I shouldn't read it, but something compelled me to open it. The entries spanned decades, including many reflections on his relationship with Eliza and me. One passage from years ago made me sink into his desk chair, my hands trembling. Rebecca is too much like me, practical but cold. She'll always make the responsible choice. But will she ever truly connect with people? Eliza reminds me so much of my mother, warm, passionate, the kind of person who lights up a room. I know I shouldn't have favorites, but how can the heart not be drawn to what it recognizes as special? The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. All these years, I'd been judged against a grandmother I'd never met, found wanting in ways I couldn't control. The responsible choices I'd made weren't valued. They were expected. My personality was a disappointment compared to Eliza's innate charisma. At the hospital the next day, I found Eliza alone in the family waiting room. Anger and hurt propelled me forward. I know what you've been doing, I said, placing printouts of her luxury apartment listing, the Mercedes lease my friend had tracked down, and bank statements showing her substantial residency salary on the table between us. You've been manipulating Dad, turning him against me while living a lifestyle that contradicts everything you've told them. For a moment, surprise flickered across her face. Then her expression hardened. You were naive to think your financial success wouldn't continue. The pattern, she said coldly. You've always been second best in their eyes, Rebecca. The money just made it official. This isn't about being the favorite, I said. It's about basic decency. Honoring your word. She leaned back, something almost like pity in her eyes. Family isn't about contracts. It's about knowing your place in the hierarchy. And you should have known yours. That night, the hospital called. Dad wanted to see me alone. I found him looking frail against the white hospital sheets, monitors beeping softly around him. Rebecca, he said, his voice weak but determined. I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Tears stung my eyes. Then why, Dad? Why cut me out of your will? Why favor Eliza in every way? He reached for my hand. You don't understand. Eliza needs the safety net more than you do. You've always been able to take care of yourself. He squeezed my fingers weakly. That's your gift, but also your burden. I'm sorry. Despite his apology, he made it clear the will would stand as written. Eliza would receive the bulk of his estate because, in his eyes, she needed it more. My strength had become my punishment. Dad died the next morning from complications of his heart condition. As I sat alone in the hospital corridor, grief mixed, with a bitter realization the father I loved had never seen me clearly, and now he never would. Rain poured down during my father's funeral, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. I stood under a black umbrella at the cemetery, water soaking the hem of my dress as I watched from the second row. Not the first row. That space was reserved for immediate family, my mother and Eliza. I'd arrived at the funeral home that morning to find the seating arrangements already made, the family photos already taken, photos I wasn't in. When I asked my mother about it, she'd touched my arm gently. The photographer only had time for a quick session with the closest family members, she'd explained. You understand. I understood perfectly. The narrative was being cemented even in death. Eliza was the grieving daughter who had been by Dad's side. I was something else. An accessory to the family, not its core. The memorial service featured Eliza giving a tearful speech about her special bond with our father. She spoke about how he'd supported her dreams of becoming a doctor, how he'd been her rock. Not a word about me. I sat silently, accepting condolences from distant relatives who seemed unsure where to place me in the family hierarchy. 3 days after we laid my father to rest, we gathered in Mr. Pearson's office for the reading of the will. Mr. Pearson had been my father's attorney for decades, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His office smelled of leather and old books. My mother and Eliza sat together on one side of the conference table. I sat alone on the other. The distance felt symbolic. Before we begin, Mr. Pearson said, I want to express my condolences to all of you. William was not just a client, but a friend. He opened a leather portfolio and began reading. I steeled myself, though Sandra's warning had prepared me for what was coming. The will was brutally clear. Eliza inherited the family home valued at $450,000, controlling interest in the family business estimated at $700,000, and investment accounts, worth approximately $50,000. My mother would continue to live in the house and receive income from the business. As for me, I received my father's collection of first edition books, his watch, and a few family photographs. The only acknowledgement of my financial contribution to Eliza was a single line. As Rebecca has already received her share during my lifetime, I leave her the items listed above with all my love. Already received my share. The $87,000 I'd given to Eliza, money I'd never gotten back, was apparently my entire inheritance. Mr. Pearson looked at me over his glasses, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, in his eyes. There are some personal letters as well, he added, handing me an envelope. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. Your father loved you very much, Rebecca. He just wanted to make sure everyone was taken care of. Eliza didn't meet my eyes. I walked out of the office in a daze, clutching the envelope containing my father's letter. I couldn't bring myself to open it yet. Instead, I drove to the park where my father used to take us for Sunday picnics when we were children, found a secluded bench, and finally let the tears come. My phone buzzed with a text. Eliza, Dad wanted me to offer you a small monthly allowance instead. I've had the lawyers draw up a contract. $500 month if you waive any rights to contest the will. Let me know if you're interested. Attached was a PDF of a proposed contract, the legal language cold and precise. I would receive what amounted to pocket change from $1 million estate, on the condition that I surrender any right to challenge the blatant inequity. The insulting nature of the offer took my breath away. I was still sitting there staring at the phone when my mother called. "Rebecca, have you considered Eliza's offer? It's very generous considering the circumstances." "Generous?" My voice cracked. "Mom, I gave Eliza my entire savings. Dad promised me it wouldn't go unrecognized. How can you think this is fair?" A pause. "Sweetheart, you've always been the responsible one. Your sister needs the security more than you. You'll be fine without it." Her voice softened. "We've always known you could take care of yourself. That's something to be proud of." "So I'm punished for being capable? While Eliza is rewarded for what, exactly? Being Dad's favorite? That's not fair, Rebecca. Your father made his decisions based on what he thought was best for both of you. After Eliza manipulated him for years." Mother sighed. "I think you should take some time to process your grief before making accusations. The allowance would help you save for that house you wanted." I hung up, too angry to continue the conversation. The allowance was hush money, plain and simple. A pittance to keep me quiet while Eliza walked away with everything. 2 days later, I received an unexpected call from Martin Holloway, my father's business partner of 20 years. "Rebecca, I've been trying to reach you since the funeral. Can we meet?" We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. Martin looked uncomfortable as he stirred his coffee, glancing around as if worried about being overheard. "I need to tell you something about your father's will," he began. "I was there, Rebecca. I watched what happened over the past year." "What do you mean?" He leaned forward. "Your sister has been systematically poisoning your father against you, telling him you were financially irresponsible, that you were bitter about her success. She'd show him altered texts from you, claiming you were demanding money. She'd come to the office in tears, saying you were harassing her. I felt sick. Dad believed her, without ever asking me? He was declining, Rebecca. More than any of you knew. His judgment was impaired, especially when it came to Eliza. She knew exactly which buttons to push." He pulled out his phone. "And I have proof." Martin showed me emails, meeting notes, even a calendar of when Eliza had visited the office, always when I was known to be at work and couldn't be reached for clarification. He'd documented the pattern because it had concerned him, especially as my father's health deteriorated. "There's more," he said. "The family business is worth far more than anyone realized. There's been a major technological breakthrough in our industry that's going to transform the company's value. Your father knew this was coming. The inheritance is closer to $3 million, not $1.2 million. The betrayal deepened with each revelation. Not only had Eliza manipulated my father, but she'd done so with a calculated eye on a much larger prize than I'd realized." "One more thing," Martin said, sliding his phone across the table. "You should hear this." He played a recording, Eliza's voice, slightly muffled but unmistakable, speaking to someone at what sounded like a social event. "Rebecca was just a stepping stone," she was saying with a laugh. "Dad was always going to leave everything to me. I just had to make sure she didn't get in the way. It wasn't even hard. He always believed whatever I told him about her. I felt physically ill listening to it." "When was this?" "Last month. Holiday party. She didn't know I was nearby. Armed with this new information, I went to the family home the following weekend to collect the few items my father had left me. I still had a key, but it wouldn't turn. In the lock." After a moment of confusion, I rang the doorbell. My mother answered, looking flustered. "Rebecca, I wasn't expecting you." "I came to pick up Dad's books and the other things he left me. My key doesn't work." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Yes. Well, Eliza thought it would be better if we changed the locks, since it's her house now, technically." "And you agreed to this?" "She owns the house, Rebecca. She's letting me stay here. I have to respect her decisions." I closed my eyes briefly, controlling my temper. "Fine. can I come in and get my things? Well, that's the thing. Eliza said she'd prefer if you made an appointment. She's not comfortable with you just stopping by whenever you want. I stared at my mother in disbelief. An appointment? To enter my childhood home? To collect items that legally belong to me? I know it sounds strange, but no, Mom. What's strange is that you're enabling this. What's strange is that I emptied my savings for Eliza, and now I'm being treated like an intruder by my own family. She flinched. You're upset. I understand. Why don't you email Eliza and set up a time when it's convenient for everyone? I turned and walked back to my car, my hands shaking with anger. In the driver's seat, I sat for a long moment, considering my options. I could send a furious email to Eliza. I could draft a letter to the medical licensing board questioning her ethical fitness based on financial manipulation and breach of contract. I actually began writing that letter that evening, outlining the ways in which Eliza had violated the trust of her family, wondering aloud if a doctor who could so callously manipulate her dying father and betray her sister could be trusted with the well-being of patients. But I didn't send it. Destroying her medical career wouldn't solve anything. It would only cement the family narrative that I was bitter and vindictive. Instead, I made appointments with 3 different attorneys specializing in inheritance disputes. The first 2 were discouraging, warning me about the difficulty and expense of challenging a valid will. The third, Diane Levinson, listened to my entire story, reviewed the documents and recordings I'd gathered, and leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. You have a stronger case than most, she said finally. The signed loan agreement, evidence of your transfers, proof of deliberate manipulation of an elderly man with declining health. It's still going to be difficult, but I believe we have grounds to challenge both the will and to pursue the loan repayment separately. What are our chances? For the loan repayment, quite good if we can prove the agreement was legitimate and not coerced. For the will challenge, maybe 50-50. But they'll know we have a case, which might make them willing to settle. I took a deep breath. Then let's do it. 2 weeks later, Eliza was served with legal papers at the hospital where she worked. The same day, a formal challenge to the will was filed with the probate court. The family explosion was nuclear. My phone lit up with angry calls and texts from relatives, all with the same message. How could you do this to your own family? My mother left a tearful voicemail begging me to reconsider for the sake of family harmony. Eliza, predictably, went on the offensive. Within days, mutual friends reported that she was telling anyone who would listen that I had always been jealous of her success and was now trying to steal her inheritance because I had gambling debts and was financially desperate. None of it was true. But the whisper campaign was effective. I noticed former friends becoming distant, avoiding eye contact when we ran into each other. A week after filing the lawsuit, my mother appeared at my apartment door. She looked tired. Older somehow. We need to talk, she said. I let her in, offering coffee, which she declined. I'll get straight to the point, she said, sitting stiffly on my couch. You need to drop this lawsuit. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, you're no longer welcome in this family. No holidays, no birthdays, no contact with me or any relatives who side with us. Is that really what you want? To be completely alone? The ultimatum hung in the air between us. For a moment, I considered it. The absolute finality of being cut off from my family. Then I thought of the past 2 years, of my depleted savings, of Eliza's cold manipulation, of my father dying, without ever seeing me clearly. I think I've been alone in this family for a long time, I said quietly. I just didn't want to admit it. My mother left without another word. The legal process ground forward slowly. Discovery phase, depositions, procedural hearings. Throughout it all, Eliza mounted an aggressive PR campaign among our social circle. She gave an interview to our local neighborhood paper about family betrayal during grief, positioning herself as the victim of a money-hungry sister. She never mentioned my name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Then came a breakthrough. My lawyer discovered that my father had a previous will, drafted just before Eliza began her campaign of manipulation. In that document, dated 18 months earlier, the estate was divided equally between Eliza and me. This was crucial evidence of how dramatically his views had been altered during his decline. "This significantly strengthens our case," Diane told me. "It shows clear intent before the undue influence began." That evening, as I was reviewing legal documents at my kitchen table, there was a knock at my door. Mark stood in the hallway, looking uncertain. "Hi," he said simply. We hadn't spoken since our almost engagement had collapsed under the weight of my family obligations. Seeing him brought back a flood of memories. "Hi," I replied. "How did you know where I live? Your old neighbor told me you'd moved." "I've been hearing things, Rebecca, about what happened with your family, with the will." He hesitated. "Can I come in?" Over cups of tea, I told him everything: the inheritance, the betrayal, the lawsuit. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "I'm so sorry," he said when I finished. "I knew something wasn't right with how they treated you, but this is beyond anything I imagined." "Why did you come looking for me?" I asked. "Because I never stopped caring about you." He hesitated. "And because I might be able to help. I have friends in financial forensics who could help trace the money trail, where the business funds went, how your father's accounts were accessed. If Eliza was manipulating him financially as well as emotionally, we might find evidence." With the trial date approaching, Eliza's lawyer reached out with a settlement offer: $150,000 to drop all claims. It was far less than my fair share of the inheritance, less even than the original amount I'd loaned her for medical school. "She's testing your resolve," Diane advised. "She thinks you'll take a quick payout to avoid the stress of trial. What do you want to do?" I thought about it overnight. The settlement would give me some financial recovery, enough to rebuild my savings. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the truth. "Reject it," I told Diane the next morning. "We're going to trial." 2 weeks before the trial began, my mother was deposed by my attorney. I wasn't present, but Diane called me immediately afterward. "She broke," Diane said. "Under oath, your mother admitted that she knew about Eliza's manipulation. She knew the loan agreement was valid. She knew your father was being influenced during his decline. Did she say why she went along with it?" "She said she was protecting the vulnerable child. She still believes Eliza needed the inheritance more than you do." "That actually helps our case, doesn't it?" "Significantly. She's essentially admitted to being complicit in the undue influence we're alleging." The night before the preliminary hearing, I received a text from Eliza. "You might want to reconsider this lawsuit. Remember your breakdown during sophomore year? How would your employer feel about knowing their software developer had been hospitalized for mental health issues? Things like that can really damage a career in tech." She was threatening to reveal my most private struggle: a 3-week hospitalization for depression after a particularly brutal finals period in college. My family had kept it quiet, supporting me through recovery. Now Eliza was weaponizing it. I forwarded the text to Diane, who replied immediately, "This is witness intimidation. Save it." The preliminary hearing was my first time seeing Eliza face to face since filing the lawsuit. She arrived flanked by 2 expensive-looking attorneys, dressed in a conservative navy suit that screamed, "Responsible medical professional." I sat at a table with only Diane, feeling outgunned but resolute. As the judge reviewed the filings, Eliza caught my eye across the room and gave me a small, smug smile. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The intimidation I'd felt melted away, replaced by a calm certainty. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for the truth to be acknowledged. The judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, denying Eliza's motion to dismiss. Outside the courtroom, reporters from the local paper approached, asking for comment. For the first time, I decided to speak publicly. "This case is about keeping promises," I said simply. "I kept mine when I paid for my sister's medical school. I'm asking the court to ensure she keeps hers." The morning the trial began, Diane called with news that changed everything. "We have a new witness," she said, excitement in her voice. "Eliza's ex-boyfriend from medical school, Jackson Taylor. They dated for most of her second year, when you started paying her tuition. He contacted me after seeing the article about your case." "What does he know?" "Everything. He says Eliza openly discussed her plans to manipulate your father for financial gain. She called it her inheritance insurance policy." "And Rebecca?" "He has recordings." The courtroom fell silent as Jackson Taylor took the witness stand. Eliza's face had drained of color when he entered the room, recognition and fear flashing in her eyes. Jackson, now a physician himself at a hospital in Seattle, testified calmly about conversations he'd witnessed. Eliza laughing about how easily her father believed negative stories about me, planning ways to isolate me from family events, explicitly stating that she never intended to repay the loan because she could ensure she'd inherit everything anyway. "I recorded some of our conversations because her behavior concerned me," he explained. "I was considering ending the relationship and wanted to protect myself in case she tried to damage my reputation afterward. The recordings were damning." Eliza's voice, clearly recognizable, outlining her strategy. "Dad already thinks Rebecca is too much like him. Practical, cold. It's so easy to convince him she doesn't need his help. She'll get nothing in the end." After 3 days of testimony, the judge delivered his ruling. The loan agreement was valid and enforceable. Eliza was ordered to repay the full $87,000 plus interest. More significantly, he invalidated the portions of the will that had been most affected by Eliza's proven manipulation. The family business and investments would be divided equally between Eliza and me, though she would retain the family home. The court finds clear and convincing evidence of undue influence during a period when William Reed's health was declining, the judge stated. This influence materially altered his estate planning in a manner inconsistent with his previously established intentions. As we left the courtroom, reporters surrounded us. Diane gave a brief statement about justice being served. I remained silent, the victory feeling hollow against the backdrop of my shattered family. The story made the local news, then was picked up by several larger outlets as a cautionary tale about family financial exploitation. I received dozens of emails from people who had experienced similar situations: siblings who had been disinherited, children who had been manipulated out of their inheritance, parents who had been financially exploited by their own children. Their stories made me realize I wasn't alone. I began meeting informally with a small group of them, sharing experiences and strategies for recovery. These meetings became a lifeline during the difficult months that followed the trial. My relationship with my mother entered a fragile reconstruction phase. She called me 3 weeks after the verdict, her voice hesitant. "I owe you an apology," she began. I convinced myself I was protecting Eliza, but I was enabling her worst instincts. Why, Mom? Why did she always need protection and I didn't? There was a long pause. When Eliza was born, I had severe postpartum depression. I couldn't bond with her for months. I think I've been overcompensating ever since, trying to prove I love her enough. Her voice broke. And you were always so capable, so independent. I took you for granted. It wasn't a complete explanation, but it was a start. We agreed to try family therapy, though reconciliation would be a long road. Eliza's professional life took a hit from the publicity. The hospital where she worked placed her on probation pending an ethics review. Several colleagues distanced themselves, concerned about association with someone who had manipulated her own dying father. One morning, about 2 months after the trial, I received a letter from Mr. Pearson, my father's attorney. Inside was a key to a safe deposit box I hadn't known existed, along with a letter from my father dated just weeks before his death. Rebecca, if you're reading this, then either I've told you about this account or I've passed on without having the courage to do so. This investment account is for you alone. Eliza doesn't know about it. I set it aside years ago, adding to it regularly. I know I haven't always been fair. By the time I realized how Eliza was manipulating me, my health was failing and I lacked the strength to confront the truth. This is my imperfect attempt to right some of that wrong. I did love you, Rebecca. I was just too weak to show it properly in the end. Dad, the safe deposit box contained documentation for an investment account in my name, worth just over $200,000. It wasn't equal to what Eliza had nearly taken, but it was proof that some part of my father had seen the truth before the end. With my portion of the family business now secured, I began working with Martin to implement changes my father had resisted for years, modernizing operations, expanding into new markets. I approached it not as merely reclaiming what should have been mine, but as building something that reflected my own vision and values. Mark and I cautiously began rebuilding our relationship. We were both different people now, me more assertive and clear-eyed about my worth, him more understanding of the complex dynamics that had driven me to make the choices I had. I don't know if we can go back to where we were, I told him honestly over dinner one night. I don't want to go back, he replied. I want to go forward, with the person you are now. My mother made her own gesture of reconciliation. Without telling me, she sold her collection of jewelry, pieces she'd collected over 40 years of marriage, and established a trust in my name, equivalent to what I'd lost during the years I'd supported Eliza. It's not about the money, she said when I discovered what she'd done. It's about acknowledging the sacrifice you made, something I should have done years ago. Eliza made one last desperate attempt to overturn the court's decision, filing an appeal that was quickly dismissed. When that failed, she reached out directly, asking to meet. We sat across from each other at a neutral coffee shop, both tense and guarded. She looked thinner, less polished than I remembered. I've lost everything, she said, tears welling in her eyes. My reputation, my colleagues' respect. Mom barely speaks to me. I know I made terrible choices, but you're still my sister. Can't we try to rebuild? I studied her, looking for signs of the old manipulation. Was this genuine remorse or another calculated performance? I don't know, Eliza. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Maybe someday, but not now. A year after the court victory, I used part of my inheritance to establish the Family Financial Justice Foundation, providing financial literacy education and legal assistance to victims of family financial exploitation. At the foundation's opening ceremony, I gave a speech about family, loyalty, and the true meaning of wealth. Real wealth isn't measured in dollars, I told the audience. It's measured in honesty, in kept promises, in relationships built on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing alone, but in that solitary stance, you may find your true strength. As I looked out at the gathered supporters, I realized my journey had come full circle. The painful sacrifice that had begun at a family meeting 3 years earlier had transformed me from victim to advocate, from someone seeking approval to someone standing firmly in her own truth. The inheritance I'd fought for had value beyond its monetary worth. It was acknowledgement, vindication, justice. But the true inheritance I'd claimed was the knowledge of my own worth, something no one could ever take away from me again.